What's going on, guys? It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View here, back with another fantasy tips and tricks video for 2016 fantasy football. Today I'm going to go over the rankings for the top 30 wide receivers in fantasy football this year, as well as the sleepers, the busts, as well as the boom or busts, and the breakouts. So guys, I'm going to talk about each individual receiver, how I think they're going to do this year, as well as some of the little tips that I can give you for your fantasy drafts and fantasy leagues this season. Let's start off with tier number 8. Of course, like I have in the running back and quarterback videos, I rank my receivers by tiers. It's just easier for me to figure out which value I'm going to take in fantasy drafts as the drafts and as the rounds go on. So in tier number 8, we start with Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders, of course, has been a great fantasy receiver for the past 3 years now. Ever since he really went to Denver, he's kind of exploded into a great player. If this was real life and I was ranking wide receivers, he would probably be in the top 15. But because this is fantasy, he is more around the bottom end of the top 30. Because you have Mark Sanchez that's coming there, and you don't really know how effective Sanchez is going to be in this offense. Sanders did take a step back as Peyton regressed last year, and I just don't think he's going to be the same guy he was a couple years ago. He still may have the talent, but just the pieces around him aren't the same, and the Denver offense isn't going to be too great. On the bright side, Denver's offense only really features 2 wide receivers and 2 guys that really take up all the targets, him and Demaryius, who I'll talk about in a little bit. So that is a positive. You're going to get consistent targets for Emmanuel Sanders in that offense, no matter who the quarterback is. DeSean Jackson is also in tier number 8. I feel like DeSean Jackson's being undervalued this year. I have him higher than where he's being drafted, actually. In tier number 8, he's higher on my board than a lot of other people's. I think Kirk Cousins is going to come in and play pretty well. I'm not going to say Cousins is going to light the world on fire, but late last year he played very well for the Redskins. And DeSean Jackson was kind of banged up last year. This year, people look at him as only a big play guy. But even for as much talent as DeSean Jackson possesses, I feel like people are overlooking that talent, and he could be a big-time sleeper in fantasy drafts, especially in standard leagues where they value touchdowns more than receptions, of course. In a PPR league, I might be sticking away from him a little bit, but DeSean Jackson is a good value for a 3rd wide receiver on your team. John Brown is also, I feel, a good value. He might be sneaking up a lot of people's boards because he's on that hype train in fantasy football. If you really compare Antonio Brown's stats to John Brown in his first couple of seasons, John Brown, a guy that is very similar to an Antonio Brown, very smaller, fast, quick, has a similar skill set. They actually have very similar stats in their first couple of seasons in the NFL. John Brown is on a very good offense in Arizona, which should be in the top 5 offenses in the NFL. You have Carson Palmer. You have a couple other wideouts, who I'll talk about in a bit. And I feel like John Brown has the most potential out of all of them, really, to break out this season. He is a big play guy. It seems like every time he gets the ball, he's taking it to the house. And he's a guy that I'm taking a chance on to be my 3rd receiver in fantasy drafts this season. Jordan Matthews wraps up the tier 8. Matthews is not as talented, in my opinion, as like a John Brown, or might not have as a breakout season. I feel like he's going to be more consistent. He has a higher floor than a John Brown or, let's say, DeSean Jackson. But he is the number 1 receiver on the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles' offense isn't very good. He would be higher if he had a consistent quarterback presence, but Jordan Matthews is going to be absolutely pelted with targets this season. He's going to get a lot of catches, and that's going to be good for your PPR leagues for sure. Tier number 7, Doug Baldwin starts tier number 7 off. He had an extremely impressive end of the season in the regular season last year. He was actually the number 1 fantasy wide receiver. I believe it was for the last 4 to 6 weeks. He was the best fantasy wide receiver in the NFL. And if he continues that trend, obviously you're going to want to pick him. But my thing is with Doug Baldwin, he's kind of being drafted where he should be drafted. He's not really a huge value right now, but he had like a ridiculous amount of touchdowns at the end of the year last year, and I just don't expect him to continue the same success. It was kind of an insane pace that he can't really keep up. And I do believe the Seahawks are going to continue to pass the ball as much as they did last year. I feel like they're going to put the ball in Russell Wilson's hand a little bit more and let him throw the ball because they don't have the Marshawn Lynch anymore to carry their run game. But still, Doug Baldwin, there's almost no way he can repeat what he did at the end of last season. For me, that's why he's only in tier number 7. Now let's look at the other Cardinals receivers. I already talked about John Brown. Now it's Michael Floyd and Larry Fitzgerald. Both of these guys are excellent fantasy options for you this season. I think both have good potential. Fitzgerald is more of a steady presence, and Larry Fitzgerald is more of a guy that if I was taking a chance on another receiver who I'm kind of, skeptical about, I think he's a boom or bust candidate. I think he might have a little bit of an injury risk. I would pick up a Larry Fitzgerald on my team because I know Larry Fitzgerald's going to be in there week in, week out. He's going to get solid production for me at the wide receiver spot. And for me, there's nothing better than solid production on my fantasy team. I just know this guy's going to get solid production week in and week out. Michael Floyd is similar to a John Brown. He does have more of the outlook, more of the actual body in terms of receiver. He's about 6'3". He has good speed, good hands. He's never really lived up to his potential quite yet, but he's had some flashes and some good spots and some good seasons. I think this year will be his best year yet, and I expect him to break out a little bit more than he has in seasons past as long as Carson Palmer stays on the field. I really do believe that this Cardinals offense is going to be pretty darn good. Next, Eric Decker. And Eric Decker is a guy that's always undervalued in fantasy football. So for some strange reason, he continues to put up touchdowns. Like, all the guy does is put up 10-plus touchdowns. Every single time he's a number 2 option in the offense in the passing game. You look in Denver where they had Demaryius Thomas and then Eric Decker. Now he's on the Jets. Last season he did great with Marshall as the number 1 receiver. He just couldn't be counted on as the number 1 target. But now that he's on the Jets as a number 2 target, he's a great fantasy option. He's being undervalued in drafts. He is a steal right now for where he is going in his ADP, his average draft position. He's a steal at that spot. Kelvin Benjain is the next guy in tier number 7. I feel like Kelvin Benjain is one of those boomer bust guys. Like, he could potentially end up as a top 10 fantasy option at wide receiver if Cam Newton and him continue their progress of what they had in their rookie season, Benjamin's rookie season. But you look at the way that the Panthers really are. In that season, they passed more than they've ever passed since 2000, the Carolina Panthers did in Benjamin's rookie year. So do you expect Benjain to get as many targets as he did as a rookie? I don't know. Plus, there's the factor that the Panthers didn't really have another number 2 receiver. Greg Olsen was a little hurt that year. So I think that the Panthers are going to spread the ball around a little bit more than they did in Benjamin's rookie year, and that's going to be the cause for his hype to go down a little bit. I wouldn't be drafting him where he's currently drafted. I think people are overdrafting him, expecting him to have a huge season. But if you're willing to take that risk, if you think you have a solid number 1 and you're going for a kind of a boomer bust number 2, then Benjain might be your guy. Next, we have Randall Cobb, the last guy, wrapping up tier number 7. Cobb, I think, is going to get back to his normal ways. Sure, he had a decent season last year, but this wasn't what we expected from Randall Cobb. He let a lot of fantasy owners down. We thought that he was going to be a great number 1 option in the Packers offense, but that's not his game. He's a guy that loves to line up in the slot. He can play outside. He does play outside. But Jordy Nelson, he's kind of like an Eric Decker in the way where he really benefits from being that number 2 target. And he puts up consistent touchdowns. He's a consistent wide receiver in a good offense. So that being said, Randall Cobb is a solid pick where he's being drafted right now. I wouldn't say he has a high floor. I don't think he has a too high of a ceiling, which he's not a sexy pick, but I think he's a good pick. Tier number 6, we start with Jeremy Maclin, who's been a great receiver even on the Chiefs. A lot of people doubted him being on the Chiefs last season. Including myself, I wasn't sure how he's going to operate in that offense that loves to check down the ball. Macklin's been known for his deep ball skill, his speed, but they put him in that offense. Andy Reid knew how to utilize him, and I feel like he's being undervalued once again. He's going mostly as a second receiver, a second, even fringe third receiver in drafts. So I think that Maclin is a great value right now. He is the #1 target in that offense. Alex Smith loves him, and Andy Reid utilizes him to his full potential. So that's excellent there in Kansas City. Sammy Watkins is a boom or bust candidate. I think he has all the talent in the world. He showed you at the end of last season that he has that talent. And really, Sammy Watkins is a guy that is a great route runner. He's great deep. And what Tyrod Taylor loves to do is, in situations that are not looking good for him, he loves to throw the ball up to Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins is a boomer bust candidate. Depends on his injury history. He has been injured the last couple of years, but he has all the talent in the world. And if you believe in Sammy Watkins' talent, then I suggest you pick him. Next, Golden Tate, Jarvis Landry, and Julian Edelman. I want to talk about all these three guys at the same time because I love all three of these guys. For the fact being that I mostly play in PPR leagues, and these guys are absolute PPR monsters. Golden Tate is going to have even more catches than he had last year. I think he was in the 90s last year. I think he'll reach 100-something catches this year, being that he's going to be the #1 target in the Detroit offense. He's going to be counted on for Matt Stafford. The Lions have changed their offense a little bit, going to more of a check-down approach, more of a, let's say, a Patriot-esque system compared to what they used to have in Calvin Johnson, where Stafford would throw the ball deep all the time. But Stafford's been smarter. He's been going to Golden Tate over the middle a lot. And I think Golden Tate's a great pick right now, especially in PPR leagues. Then there's Jarvis Landry, who I love maybe the most out of all three of these guys. He might have like top 5 in receptions. I think he had like 120 catches. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe 110. But he consistently puts up his first 2 years in his career great reception totals, great target totals. Ryan Tannehill loves to throw him the ball. He's their third down, he's their chain mover, he's their route runner. And I know that Devontae Parker's there, who I'll talk about. But Jarvis Landry is their #1, is Ryan Tannehill's go-to guy, and he is a great steal in drafts. Julian Edelman, okay, there's been a little bit of problems with his injuries and stuff like that, but you gotta believe that Julian Edelman, when he's playing, he is the key. And I know that a lot of people think Rob Gronkowski is, but the slot receiver in the Patriots offense has always been the key to their offense. You look in their early 2000s, they had Troy Brown, and then they moved on to Wes Welker, and now it's Julian Edelman. That has been their key to their offense forever, since I've been watching the Patriots. And, you know, Edelman is a tough guy. He's going to come back from this injury. He's motivated. He wants to prove that he is still one of the best receivers in the NFL. Brady loves the guy. They're like best buds. So I don't see why Edelman would not have a great season as long as he's on the field. And in PPR leagues, he's definitely going in the right spot. I don't think he's being undervalued. I think he's going in the right spot right now. And I would pick him in that spot, especially if I was in PPR leagues. Number 5, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, and T.Y. Hilton. All these guys have tremendous upside, and all these guys I would target in your fantasy drafts. Starting with Amari Cooper, the only problem with Cooper, I have him a little bit lower than on typical ESPN or NFL.com or Yahoo lists, because where they have him right now, he would already have to surpass what he did as a rookie because he has so much hype, because people just automatically assume that he's going to do better than he did as a rookie, which I think he will. I don't know how much better. I think he's a great talent. He's one of the most hyped receivers in the last couple of years. He had a great rookie season. Him and Derek Carr seem to have great magic. But there's also the factor that Michael Crabtree is there. And Michael Crabtree had just as good, if not a better fantasy season last year. And a lot of people are sleeping on Michael Crabtree. But Amari Cooper I do love as well. Brandon Cooks and T.Y. Hilton. Okay, Brandon Cooks, great route runner, electrifying playmaker, tons of speed. And I love the Saints offense this year. All the players on the Saints offense I'm targeting because I love Drew Brees. I love what Sean Payton does with that offense. I love the passing game. And Brandon Cooks is that #1 target. he is a great player. And whenever Bill Belichick says you're good, you're probably a pretty damn good player. So Brandon Cooks, I'm definitely targeting this year in no matter what format. And then we got T.Y. Hilton, who I think is being undervalued a ton, mostly because Andrew Luck's back, and you look at the stats that T.Y. Hilton put out without Andrew Luck, with Matt Hasselbeck, a guy that's not necessarily known for his deep ball anymore. T.Y. Hilton put up great stats. He put up over 1,100 yards. He's going to be a target monster. He's going to be that big play guy for the Colts offense if you believe Andrew Luck's going to be back to being Andrew Luck. Even if he's not, even if he's better than Matt Hasselbeck, that's a great option in T.Y. Hilton because they have the connection there, and T.Y.'s shown that he is talented without having a great quarterback. Then we have Tier 4, Demaryius Thomas, Jordy Nelson, and Mike Evans. All these guys are in a similar boat. Mike Evans kind of dropped off a little bit last year, but I expect Jameis Winston and him. Jameis Winston's only going to improve. He's shown a lot of progress, and I think he's going to hook up with Mike Evans for more touchdowns. That's the thing that held Mike Evans back. He had a great rookie season, but touchdowns held him back his second year, and drops. If he improves that in those two categories, you know you're going to get a great guy. And then Demaryius Thomas. He was a guy that dropped a lot of passes as well last year, but he's with a different quarterback. He's with Mark Sanchez. In their first preseason game, actually, that happened today, he hooked up with a 30-yard touchdown. Demaryius Thomas was wide open, looked pretty good for Demaryius Thomas' sake. My thing is, I think Demaryius Thomas is also being undervalued because you look at his statistics, you look at how consistent he's been. I know that he's had Peyton Manning his whole career, basically, except for Tim Tebow, but the guy did well with Tim Tebow, so how bad can Mark Sanchez possibly be? So Demaryius Thomas, I feel, is being undervalued for such a good talent. And then we have Jordy Nelson, who's a guy that was one of the best receivers in 2014 and 2013. He's number one in big plays. Him and Aaron Rodgers are number one for the combo with the most big plays in the league from, I believe it was when they first started hooking up till 2014 till Jordy Nelson got hurt. And he's a consistent guy. He's the go-to guy for Aaron Rodgers. He's on a great offense. He's had plenty of time to catch up and get healthy. So I believe Jordy Nelson's a solid pick, even at his age this season. Next, tier number 3, Alshon Jeffery, Keenan Allen, and Dez Bryant. Alshon Jeffery I like more than in years past. I usually kind of stay away from Bears players or receivers, not necessarily Bears players, because I have been a big fan of Matt Forte in the past. But Alshon Jeffery I've never really believed too much. But this season I'm a believer, mostly because he's going to be the number one target in a Jay Cutler offense. And Jay Cutler, when he has that number one target that is bona fide stud, like Alshon Jeffery is, who put up in the top 5 yards per game last season when he did play. He had some great stats when he did play. He did get a little banged up. That is a concern. But Jay Cutler, look in the past with Brandon Marshall and now Alshon Jeffery. He's going to lock on that number one target, and he loves to feed the number one target a ton of passes. And then we have Keenan Allen, who's an absolute love for me. He might be my favorite receiver for where he's going in fantasy drafts this year. He was, I believe, top 3 to 5 fantasy receivers, especially in PPR last year. He was on pace for ridiculous statistics. He was on pace to be top 5 in fantasy. So you got to go after Keenan Allen in PPR leagues, especially. Phillip Rivers and him hook up on those short routes, those short timing passes. Keenan Allen's perfect for that. He's back, he's healthy, he's ready to go. And I'm loving Keenan Allen in the 2016 season. Dez Bryant's back. He's had plenty of time with the foot. The foot is an interesting injury. It's similar to Julian Edelman, but Dez has played through it. He's gotten past that rusty year, but the one thing you can count on, especially in standard leagues, is for Dez Bryant to be a stud and for Dez Bryant to come back and put up 10-plus touchdowns. It's just what Dez Bryant does. Tony Romo and him have a magic together. And Dez Bryant's a stud, man. He's physical. He's hardworking. I expect him to come back and be a beast this season. Tier number 2, Allen Robinson, who I absolutely had a huge major fantasy crush on last season. He's shown even more improvement in camp this year. People are saying he's playing angry. He caught 3 balls for 80 yards in his first preseason game. He looks like he's an improved receiver. He looks like he has an improved focus. And that even tells me that he's going to be better than he was before. And you look at this guy's skill set, he is a Julio Jones-esque receiver. He's big. He can go up and catch the ball. He's fast. He can separate from defenders. He's physical. I love Allen Robinson in fantasy drafts. And Blake Bortles will feed him the ball. All right. DeAndre Hopkins is next in tier number 2. The two out of the 3 receivers and Brandon Marshall. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is a big play guy more so than Brandon Marshall. I think he'll put up it'll be pretty close in the touchdown category. Probably more yards than Brandon Marshall, seeing as how he doesn't have a true number 2 target behind him like Brandon Marshall does with Eric Decker. But the thing that Brandon Marshall offers over DeAndre Hopkins to me is more consistency in terms of targets and receptions. Fitzpatrick's going to find him a lot, but one thing with Hopkins that he has is age. So these guys are kind of flip-floppy to me. Depends what league you play in. If I was in PPR, I'd probably take Brandon Marshall, but it depends. Both these guys, it might end up switching at the end and when I get to my fantasy drafts, but both these guys are solid contributors in probably the end of the first, early second round. AJ Green ends tier number 2. He's the 4th receiver on my rankings. The reason why, a lot of people look at that maybe AJ Green will have a worse year than really he has in the past. He didn't have his best year last year. It was pretty good, and he was still in the top 10 for fantasy wide receivers. And Andy Dalton wasn't even there for the whole season. But the thing that happened this offseason, Andy Dalton lost a lot of his other targets. And I know that they brought in Randall Cobb. Actually, Randall Cobb's apparently been looking pretty good. But AJ Green is going to get even more catches this year because all of Dalton's guys are gone. He's going to lock on to Green. He's going to get more catches, more touchdowns. AJ Green from a couple years ago is going to be back. And if that guy is back, I'm looking at a top 5 fantasy wide receiver for sure. Tier number 1, we have Julio Jones. Number 3, actually. Julio Jones is a deep threat guy. He's a physical guy. There's nothing that I can't say that's bad about Julio Jones. Other than maybe his touchdown production. He's never been huge for touchdowns. But I expect that to get better. I don't think he will have the same amount of receptions because they did bring in a couple more targets. They're trying to get the run game more involved in Atlanta. But I think touchdowns may go up for Julio Jones, and he's a top 3 pick in fantasy. I think these 3 top guys, if I was drafting in the top 3 in fantasy this year, I'd take all receivers, no matter what. Second, I have Odell Beckham. Absolute stud, great hands, great separation, great route running, savvy route runner. And he's just Odell Beckham. He's a stud. Eli is going to go to him on the big downs. And I think he has potential. For me, the reason why I pick Odell Beckham over Julio is I feel like he's going to put up the consistent touchdown rate. And I feel like him and Julio are going to have about the same reception rate. And Odell, it just has more potential to me because he's coming into his 3rd season where you typically see a huge jump in production. I know it's going to be hard for him. But Julio, I feel like I've seen him in his prime, and I don't know if he's going to get any better. And number 1, of course, is my boy Antonio Brown. No doubt, number 1 fantasy pick in fantasy this year. He is the highest floor and the highest ceiling at the exact same time. The guy could break the receptions record this year. He is the toughest cover in the NFL, to respect to my boy Rob Gronkowski. But I think Antonio Brown is just a little bit better in terms of harder to cover. And he's just so quick. He can make something out of nothing no matter who his quarterback is. And if Big Ben plays more games this year, you could see earth-shattering numbers from number 84 in Pittsburgh. So those are my top 30 wide receivers in NFL this year for fantasy football. Now let's get to the sleepers and the busts or boomer busts. Okay, so we're going to start with the sleepers. Sleepers this year, I look at Willie Snead as a little bit of a sleeper. There has been reports that Thomas in camp has been looking really good for the Saints, but Willie Snead's still going to be taking that second wide receiver spot on the team. So I definitely look for Willie Snead at the end of drafts. He's definitely being undervalued in fantasy drafts this season because he is the second receiver on the Saints this year, and it's going to be difficult to take his place in that offense considering how good of a chemistry him and Drew Brees had in the first season. So I feel like he's being undervalued and is a sleeper. Michael Crabtree is a big-time sleeper. He may be my number one sleeper for especially PPR leagues. I feel like Crabtree last year, he had an even better season than maybe Amari Cooper even had. And Cooper's been getting all this hype. He's way up in like the third, fourth round being drafted. So guys, take a look at Michael Crabtree's statistics last year. He has a great connection with Derek Carr. He's that veteran security blanket for Carr, and he's a target monster. Both of those guys are going to get lots of targets, and I think it might even be sort of an even share in terms of receptions going into next season. So Michael Crabtree's a big-time sleeper, especially in PPR leagues. Then we have Chris Hogan, who is taking up Brandon LaFell's old role. At least we're talking about 2014 Brandon LaFell in the Patriots system. I feel like Hogan's an even better player than Brandon LaFell, and he comes in, he can provide more versatility to the offense. He can line up in the slot and outside. Tom Brady apparently loves this guy. He's what Belichick loves in a player. Look, he played lacrosse just like Belichick. Belichick loves that stuff. And Chris Hogan, I feel like he's a bigger body, and he's just been looking really, really good in camp. So Chris Hogan is a sleeper as well. Devin Funchess is a sleeper because he's going to be the number 2 wide receiver in the Carolina Panthers offense, which was number 1 in points last season. I feel like Funchess could be one of those guys that gets you a lot of touchdowns, consistently a touchdown producer for you this season, I feel like. And last year, as a rookie, he continued to get better week after week after week. So that tells me he's starting to get it at the NFL level. So Devin Funchess is a sleeper. Then we have Sammy Coates, who I think is going to end up starting over Marcus Wheaton in the Pittsburgh offense. And one of those receivers is going to go off. I feel like Sammy Coates has the higher potential because he has the big body, because he's more like Martavis Bryant in taking his role in the offense. Wheaton he's had a bunch of opportunity to take that spot, but he's never been able to take that spot. As much as Bryant's been out, he's never really capitalized on it. But Sammy Coates, I think he can capitalize with some bright spots last year at the end of the year. And with that frame and the speed, I feel like he could be a good pick in fantasy drafts at the end. And then we have Tavon Austin, who might be, I guess he's not really a sleeper because of where he's being drafted. I feel like is just where I would draft him. But, still, Tavon Austin is a guy that's going to get the ball a lot in the Rams offense. And he's a slot receiver who's consistently gotten better as his career has gone on in things like route running, things like after the catch, that sort of thing. Tavon Austin has improved as a receiver in his career, and I feel like he's going to have his best season yet, so he's a sleeper for me. And Vincent Jackson is the last sleeper I have here. Look, guys, Jameis Winston, as I said with Mike Evans, he's going to improve, and I feel like both those receivers are going to benefit from that. So Vincent Jackson could be a big-time touchdown producer, especially this season. Then we have the boomer bust with Tyler Lockett, Devontae Parker, Marvin Jones, Dante Moncrief, and Torrey Smith. Tyler Lockett is a player who I feel could rather be a boom or a bust. That's why I'm calling it a boom or a bust. And he has all the speed, all the athleticism. He's a smaller guy, and he had a really great end to the year last year. But the thing is, he plays for Seattle, and I don't know how they will be able to produce 2 receivers in that offense. We'll see. But I feel like every game he could potentially have a touchdown score. He can take the ball from any point on the field and get a touchdown. He's a great punt returner. He's excelled as a receiver late in the year and was counted on in the playoffs and at the end of the year for Russell Wilson. So he could be Russell Wilson's new target. Devontae Parker is a guy that's coming into a new system. He was playing for Miami last year. He showed some bright spots as a deep threat. He's not a guy that's going to put up a lot of receptions for you, but in standard leagues, I feel like he could be that next big play guy that you could capitalize off of in the later rounds. Marvin Jones is a boomer bust as well. These are all guys that are kind of going around the same spot. Marvin Jones I actually like a lot because he's coming into Detroit and he's going to be replacing Calvin Johnson's role. And that role, like in the past, has been a huge part of the offense, and you can't really take that receiver away. So Marvin Jones is a guy that actually put up a lot of touchdowns per opportunity. So Marvin Jones is a steal right now and is a boomer bust candidate. If he starts and he gets that chemistry with Matthew Stafford, he could potentially be a boom. Dante Moncrief is kind of going down on my list because of the way that people are drafting him now, but he's a boomer bust because, you know, if he ends up being that second receiver, if he lives up to his potential in the Colts system, he's going to potentially be a 1,000-yard receiver. If not, he ends up being the third receiver behind Dorsett. Those are the two options for Dante Moncrief. Torrey Smith, I think, is more of a boom than a bust because he is really the only target on San Fran, and I know that Bruce Ellington's there, and actually he's been getting a lot of coverage from some of the analysts around the league, but Torrey Smith is proven that he can be a great deep threat, and we've seen in the past that Chip Kelly's offense always produces a good number one fantasy wide receiver. So thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you check out the other episodes that I've already done, the running backs and the quarterbacks. Peace out.